Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Geneva Peace Week. Warm thank you to our host, Geneva Peace Week, and our partners at the UN Convention for Combating Desertification for the excellent collaboration. And we managed to put this topic of land restoration on the agenda, which wasn't easy. I also wanted to welcome our participants in the room, but also online, and all of you who are going to watch this recording after the event. My name is Anna Brach, and I'm head of human security and planetary resilience here at the Geneva Center for Security Policy, co-organizer of this peace panel. Today's session looks at the very practical question, how land restoration can be a pathway for peace and security, and especially in the fragile and conflict-affected settings. We are going to focus on 4 themes. First, setting the stage and talking about the risk and fragility in the context of land degradation. Then we're going to move to innovative approaches to close the climate and environmental finance gap and unlock the peace-building potential for land restoration. Thirdly, we are going to talk about the role of data and innovation in de-risking investments and fostering cooperation. And finally, we are going to look at how can we translate the evidence from communities and from research into policies and financing strategies. For today's panel, we have a fantastic group of people. I am not going to go into their bios for the sake of time, but you all have access to their bios on the event webpage. Mr. Wuchang Kang, who's program manager at the Global Mechanism of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, our partner co-organizer of this event. Ms. Keira Tarif, a researcher in the climate and risk program at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, who is joining us online. Hello, Keira. Ms. Nazanin Moshiri, Senior Advisor on Climate, Peace and Strategic Partnership at the Berghoff Foundation. And finally, Mr. Justin Mondi, co-founder of the Mapping Pathways for Security and chairman of the SLM Partners, chairman of Etna Center of the Qatar Foundation. A few housekeeping notes. We are going to run for 90 minutes. Please keep your interventions tight, but we already practiced it, so it's going to be fine. And I'll give gentle time signals if anybody's going over time. We will have audience Q&A by the end of the session, and I'm asking all of you to stay short focused, but also solution oriented if possible. And please use microphones and keep the tone respectful and solution oriented. I'm going to be a little bit rude somewhere around the Q&A moment because I will need to check my phone to see what questions came from our participants online. Our outcome for today is very simple. We want to identify practical pathways that connect finance, innovation, and policy. So land restoration becomes a real instrument for peace. We tend to focus now on, how technologies can be, the best solution to the problems in peace and security that we are facing. And one citation that I heard years ago already is that the best technology is not technology, and very often the nature-based solutions are actually those that can bring a lot, and they are not being invested in as much as we could. Of course, with the help of technology. So, it's not an either-or question, it's an and question. It's a question of balancing the nature-based solutions and technology solutions. With this, we will move now to our discussion. So I'm going to sit down. And the first question goes to Wuchang and then Keira, where we are going to explore a little bit more about the background or how risk and fragility operates in the land degradation. So I wanted to ask you, Chang, and then go to Keira on and ask you about how land degradation contributes to conflict and human insecurity, and what role can land restoration play in fostering resilience, peace, and stability?
Thank you, Anna. Good morning, everyone. My thanks also goes to our co-organizer of this session, GCSP. Thank you for the collaboration and opportunities for us given to us to organize this session at Geneva Peace Week. So the question actually really hit ground because this topic had relatively low sort of recognition from the entire climate security dialogue areas and so on. So land degradation itself is a cause and also consequence of fragility and conflicts. It's kind of a vicious cycle. So when land degraded, we lost soil fertility, land productivity, and also it affects the water security as well. It also affects, in the end, food availability. So when the resources are depleted, the tensions and the competitions of the resources getting higher, and then it eventually escalates into the form of violence and conflicts in the end. The other way around the story is also possible. So when conflict happened, then also it affects the resource depletion there. It's technically or mechanically destroy the land or forest by the military actions as such. And then it also lead to a condition where the governance system is not fully functional, operational at the same time. And also those guidelines, protective guidelines, not at the best as it functions. So people just have to turn to the natural resources already under depletion to find their way of surviving there. So it's actually adds the fuel to exacerbating the the land-related resource availability. So those are sort of, as I said, it's kind of a vicious circle. So we need to break this vicious circle. Then where the land can come in. So for the UNCC, the nexus between land and peace and security is fundamental. So we want to bring this land restoration as an element for global or regional or national security and stability, because sometimes land restoration, land degradation also trigger the migration and forced human translocations. So it also contributes to disability and insecurity in certain level at all levels. So what can land restoration could bring to us? So if you invest in land, it improves the food availability, it improves the livelihoods, it can improve also other environmental or natural sort of nature-based benefits, ecosystem benefits, and then it eventually reduce the burden of communities to have them more adapted to climate crisis, and also contributing to building resilience and adaptability of affected communities. So the investment in land also important in terms of economy. So when invest $1 in land restoration, it could bring back minimum $7 in return in many different forms. So in short, and in a nutshell, so rehabilitation of degraded lands improves the food security, water security, and also it contributes to creating jobs and it revive the local economy as well. So all these can contribute to the stabilizing the communities at the ground level. So it would contribute for creating sort of space for the collaboration and cooperation with different stakeholder groups that are using the same resources. And then this collaboration can lead up to creating another space for their sort of in terms of cooperation, collaboration, and managing the natural resources more sustainably, which is sort of peace security dividends coming from the land restoration cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chang. It was such a comprehensive answer, but I wanted still to hear from Keira if she has anything to add regarding her work in the research community and working with communities as well. Ira, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Anna. I hope you can all hear me there in the audience, and I'm sorry I have to join you online today. But yeah, I maybe can just complement Uchang's intervention with some research findings from my team at CIPRI, the Climate Change and Risk Program. We've analyzed research on the relationships between climate change, environmental degradation, and peace and security in several different regions. And that research shows that when land is degraded, there is a risk of the rise of insecurity, not just in one single way, but through multiple pressures that are reinforcing each other. And just to name some of those dynamics, we've identified how land degradation has a negative impact on livelihoods, so soil erosion, vegetation loss and loss of pasture land, rivers breaching, banks lead to households losing access to income, to food security, and also to dignity. And in areas where people rely very heavily on natural resources, this sort of leads to competition and can also tip communities into violence. We've also identified examples where land degradation has forced people to move. In Somalia in 2023, there was a historic drought that led to more people being displaced than the conflict between the armed group Al-Shabaab and the government forces. And these people seek assistance in urban areas, but also find themselves very often without secure access to land and to services, which can lead to repeat instances of displacement. So land degradation is also a serious challenge for durable solutions in some regions. The third thing is that land degradation also creates space for armed groups in some cases where the state can't manage land resources. Other groups will step in. And so we see examples from around the world of armed groups mediating land and water disputes to gain local legitimacy. And this has very long-term consequences for environmental governance and also for people's perceptions of the role of the state in ensuring good environmental governance as well. And I think the final point here is that land degradation is also exacerbated by elite exploitation in many cases, and in many parts of the world where violence between communities around access to natural resources is on the rise, we see that land degradation is one part of the story, and also land privatization and sort of exploitation of land resources in an unsustainable way is another part of that story. So we can see how politically connected elites can control productive land at the expense of smallholders, and this can deepen inequalities and also inflame social and political grievances. So I think as Uchang was saying, soil degradation, deforestation, sort of drying up of water recharge mechanisms. This isn't just an ecological loss. This is also a governance failure, and it's a livelihood crisis, and it's also a shock to people's dignity. So when land systems break down, we can see that there is a strong risk that social systems will also follow. And then this brings us to the second point, which is, I think, really important, that land degradation has an impact on conflict dynamics means that land restoration can also unlock some opportunities for peacebuilding. And working with IOM in Somalia, my team has seen that rehabilitating degraded land through regenerative agriculture, through water harvesting techniques, and community management of local resources, this doesn't just increase yields, agricultural yields, it also creates a platform for dialogue. So when you bring people who were once in competition around a project to share labor and then to share the benefits of that labor, you're also creating a process of rebuilding trust. So cooperation, I think, around natural resources can become a form of local governance that isn't necessarily imposed from above, but is actually practiced from below. So I think this is a really important opportunity here through land restoration to sort of work on social restoration in ways that are not confined to formal peace processes inside a conference room, but are actually forged through shared work and shared responsibility and shared futures for communities as well. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Nazanin, coming to you and kind of connecting to what Kairat just said about social restoration, how do you see the inclusive community-led resource governments such as water committees or customary land mechanisms help build the social trust and cooperation needed for land restoration and to be genuinely peace positive?
Just want to say thank you so much for inviting me, and it's great to be in person for once. Usually you're online at these kinds of events. It's just great to be here, even though, you know, we wanted more of a turnout, but a lot of people hopefully are watching us online. It's just great to be here in Geneva, and I hope, you know, we can have this again next year. So just disclaimer, I joined Berkhoff literally a few months ago. So prior to Berkhoff, I was a senior analyst at International Crisis Group. But obviously, I've just been thrown straight into Berkhoff and all the great work that they've been doing, which is very much along the lines of what Kira was there talking about, which I think is really important. And I would say, you know, just to answer your question in one line, you know, this kind of inclusive community-led talks, it's not just technical. It is a social glue, I would say, that makes peace and resilience possible. I just want to give you a really great example from Berkhoff of the work we've done, which was with the Weathering Risk Pillar. And I can see one of my colleagues here from Humanitarian Dialogue in the room. We also work with Adelphi as well. This is a really fantastic example where we were able to rebuild trust and in a very difficult situation in Kala, in northeastern Iraq, in Kurdistan, sort of close to the Iranian border there. There's a canal there called Balajo, which basically serves around 23 villages. And for years, water scarcity there, you know, economic crisis, war, of course, all the political turbulence, corruption, has turned villagers upon each other in this area. And, you know, upstream farmers were tapping into the canal illegally. And downstream families were just basically not even left with enough drinking water. And there was just so much pollution in the canal as well. So on top of that, you have the impacts of climate change, you know, hotter summers. Also, the river flows are being affected by the Sirwan Dam, which was constructed across the border in Iran, which I know you know about that, Tucheng. So we worked with a local partner, Peace Paradigms, to basically convene dialogues. And look, things were really tense in the beginning. People just didn't even want to turn up. They didn't want to talk to each other. They didn't understand each other. What we did, it was very simple. We organized a field visit. And people then realized actually the impact of their actions. But I guess this is also a lesson because it wasn't enough just to have the dialogue. And you know, the dialogue went on for months. We had to do something. So 2 wells were built. And I think that really was a tipping point because when people saw this wasn't just, you know, another kind of internationally funded dialogue, it was actually something practical that came out of it. There was real impact. They took it a lot more seriously. And the same thing has happened in our work in Somalia as well, where we set up this radio show to build knowledge around climate and conflict. But again, you know, we were trying to give people the tools to be able to adapt as well. I wanted to give an example of how things can go a little bit wrong on the flip side. And this is not from Berkhoff. This is actually something that I think Kira knows quite a lot about. It was an EU-funded project in Somalia, where the EU basically funded sort of dialogue between 2 communities in a town called Marka, which is in central Somalia. It's surrounded by, you know, Al-Shabaab territory, but in the town, people didn't have access to water. So there was a canal rehabilitation and land rehabilitation that was needed so people could farm and use that water. This is what happens in certain circumstances whereby you're setting up water committees in very insecure locations where you have armed groups or people who, you know, don't want these things to work. So unfortunately, 2 people from that water committee were kidnapped by Al-Shabaab. They were eventually released. Al-Shabaab also planted some IEDs along that canal, tried to blow up the whole thing. But what happened in the end was that, you know, the project still went ahead and people were still able to sort of combat all of these risks and come together because they realized actually it benefits all of us, it benefits everyone. So I just wanted to give a little inkling of what it's like in some of the sort of conflict areas we're dealing with, and how, in a way, you can't just have dialogue, you've got to attach it to something a bit more tangible, I would say.
Thank you so much. It was such a powerful list of examples and how we can, you know, get things right or wrong. We'll now move a little bit to a more global level, because I wanted to ask you, Chang, about the synergies among the Rio Conventions on land, climate, biodiversity, and how these synergies can be harnessed to deliver coordinated nature-based solutions to strengthen peace and security in these fragile settings.
Thank you. Very good question. Actually, there are a lot of discussions around the synergy between the three Rio conventions. As you know, all of these conventions have its own objectives and own sort of decision-making mechanism. So, I mean, it's not always easy to say how all these three conventions are sort of coordinated or aligned. But I mean, definitely there are some strong messages coming out from this old synergy dialogue spaces, that it is policy coherence and also coordination. So I don't want to say about this coordination, policy coherence among the Rio conventions, but it has come to the operational level. So when you think about nature-based solutions, particularly related to the climate resilience, also biodiversity conservation, as well as land restoration, there is huge room for this cooperation and also for the policy coordination, collaboration at national level. That's the minimum or proper level, I guess. So in many cases, many ministries in many cases are sort of siloed. They work on separately, focusing just on the environmental goals or land restoration goals or biodiversity goals, but they need to break this kind of silo, and there might be some sort of connections or coordinations among different policy lines, particularly when it comes to the implementation. So it's this sort of policy coherence coordinations also bring some benefits in terms of financing aspect, because everybody talks about efficiency given the current circumstances. I mean, everybody dying for money to seek for, in seeking the resources to support the project. But I mean, in general, nature-based solutions cannot be suggested as a solution for single objectives. So well-framed or designed MBS nature-based solutions project or program can address multiple challenges, including biodiversity goal and multiple climate security concerns, and also land restoration goal as well. And it also contributes to addressing the water security, food security, and in this case, particular case, and it also contributes to the building of competence peace in general. So that's the angle we could look at, particularly when you talk about the synergy among the Rio Conventions. Obviously, the Rio Conventions has no specific mandate to discuss about peace and security, right? But I mean, what I'm saying is that you can integrate these lens in more operational level as the partners are willing to incorporate them in their interventions on the implementation or realization of their goals under these Rio Conventions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uchang. And it's interesting what you're saying, because even though these conventions do not have the peace and security angle as such or language, we all know that these issues impact human security so much. So we are all working on peace and security without even naming it. Keira, with Uchang's answer, I just wanted to come back to you and ask you, how do you see from your vantage point these synergies working for the development partners and peace building actors? How can you use them?
Yeah, thank you, Anna, for the question. I think I can maybe build a little bit more on what Nazanin was explaining about connecting and reinforcing dialogue opportunities. But I think maybe just to say on a broader point that we often talk about or hear that humanitarian and development and peace actors should break out of their silos and work together. And that's a bit of a cliche now, but I think that we can also acknowledge that in the topic of land restoration, peace and security, it's still a bit more aspirational than practical at this point. So we can see that environmental programs are designed to address ecosystems problems, and peacebuilding actors design their programs to focus on intergroup relationships, but in some fragile settings, as we have been discussing, ecosystems and human relationships are very deeply connected, and so the responses to them should also be connected. I don't think that's a very controversial statement. And we know that nature-based solutions have the potential to deliver much more than just, than carbon sequestration, not that that's a small goal, or to control erosion in those settings, but nature-based solutions can also be designed intentionally to strengthen governance and to foster cooperation and to reduce the pressures that lead to violence in communities. And I think that's why the peace-building part of this is so crucial, because peace-building creates the social conditions for those environmental programs to be successful over time, trust and reciprocity and local legitimacy as well. So recognizing that there are still challenges to working across organizations in different parts of the HDP world, I think we can also see that they bring a comparative advantage when they collaborate on land restoration as a mechanism for environmental peace building, because development actors often hold longer funding windows and technical tools and infrastructure budgets that are all critical for scaling up land restoration work beyond small-scale pilot projects. And at the same time, peacebuilding actors bring really strong local networks and really granular knowledge about power structures and grievances and solidarity networks and who speaks to whom and who's trusted and who's excluded. And I think these two forms of expertise can meet early in the design phase to create a real opportunity to implement much more than adaptation projects, but really to build social contracts through land rehabilitation. And then maybe just a point that's also related to what Uchang was just saying about coordination and financing. There is a really important role for donors here as well, because they have a significant potential to advance funding mechanisms for programs that explicitly link environmental goals with social cohesion. Programs, for example, that could engage ex-combatants in reforestation programs, or to pair climate adaptation priorities with a plan for post-conflict reconstruction, or to approach flood risk reduction in a way that can support durable solutions to displacement. So I think that's a real opportunity. And then because we were all talking about the need for more efficient financing, one of the incentives I think here for donors is that this kind of approach can also make every dollar or whatever currency spent on these integrated approaches do much more. It can, restore the environment, stabilize institutions, and reduce conflict risks in tandem. Thanks.
The second topic we are going to cover in this conversation on innovative approaches to close the climate environmental finance gap. And Uchang, I'm coming to you for the first question, but then Justin, I will come to you next. Uchang, how can development partners and peacebuilding actors reduce investment risk and promote innovative financing, such as blending or conflict-sensitive mechanisms to channel funds towards peace-positive land restoration? And we had a conversation yesterday during unofficial drinks about partnering with private sector as well. So please.
Thank you, Anna, for this question. Actually, this is a huge question, so I don't have actually a whole answer to this. But I've been keep thinking this question since I worked on this nexus between land, peace, and security under the Peace Forest Initiative, which is a flagship initiative of the UNCCD that's addressing this nexus. So financing is always question how, in a way, how you can promote this nexus between land and peace security. And we know that there are a huge amount of money available for environmental restoration. And then on the other side, there are a huge amount of money available for peace building activities. But you cannot find many of converging project programs or funded targeting both goals are not many available as far as I know. So actually, the reason for being underfunded for this nexus that I think it's about question of the risk. Actually, speaking about risk, there are already many dialogues and interventions going around about de-risking. So de-risking can come in many different forms or different methodologies. But since I'm not the financing expert here, so I'm just speak very superficially, if I can. So de-risking can be, I mean, this can be sort of removed by sharing the risk, so to say, risk sharing. So risk sharing can be happening in a private public sector and also local player and also global player, and sometimes between the government and also private sector as well. So actually the fragility sometimes opens another window for private sector to think about how they can invest or their restructure the investment strategy in different intervention areas. For example, the combination of different interventions such as regenerative agriculture or renewables or water purification or desalination can directly impact on land restoration and also contribute to rebuilding society as during the rebuilding processes. So another aspect of de-risking could be transparency and information sharing. So because without knowing what is happening, what it's going to be like in the next 5-10 years, then nobody wants to spend there to invest their money in the fragile context. So I think it's really critically important to share the information as much as possible. Also have sort of open platform to those who want to access the proper information when they are thinking about proper size of investment in the locations. So all these come actually to my last point, which is partnership. So partnership is critically important, right? I mean, partnership encompasses almost everything from the policymakers, expert and the practitioners on the ground, and the funding side, and also implementation side, community level, you name it. So here under the UNCSD Peacebuilding Initiative, we like to propose sort of inclusive platform to approach this kind of open inclusive platform for designing and implementation of such land restoration projects contributing to peace and security. I will stop here, and I have to answer another question.
Of course, and there will be questions, so please prepare those. But what you were talking about, investment and any policy decisions require data, and our decisions should be data-based. I know that we live in a world where it is becoming problematic. But Justin, I wanted to ask you, how can data-driven risk mapping and evidence from initiatives like yours, your initiative on mapping pathways for security, can be used to design financing mechanisms that attract investment into these fragile areas? The floor is yours.
Anna, thank you very much, Steve. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and to be part of this great panel with Nazanin and Kira too. In answering your question, may I give 2 seconds of a sort of a 60,000 meter foot view of what's going on? So we have, and there are 2 bits of this I'd love to focus on. So we have at the moment about 122 million displaced people in the world. The majority of them stay within their country, about 67% stay within their country. Of those who leave, another 60% stay in the immediate neighborhood. So very few actually are of that overall amount going. The majority of people who are displaced come from countries which are food insecure. And most of those countries are both food insecure and suffering from climate vulnerability and exposure. The number of countries which are seriously impacted by climate change at the moment, and host these, as in seriously, catastrophically impacted, are 3, and that's likely to raise to 65 within the next 15, 20 years. And we have a figure whereby every 1% increase in food insecurity leads to a 2% increase in migration. So we also have within that a global population of 700 million people who are food insecure. So what we have is a wonderful opportunity for more migration, because we have a lot of very hungry people, and we have a climate catastrophe that is on its own terms very bad, but also as an amplifier for all the other risks which we know which are out there. The other part of the sort of the overview is that, as we all know, we have a process at the moment whereby, because of the risks which are being perceived, security expenditure is going to go from 3.5% to 3% to 5%, or originally 2%, then to 5%, of which 3.5% is meant to be on military, 1.5% on infrastructure. And as we all know, aid allocations 0.7% GNP are now at 0.37% and are likely to go further. So we have a combination of massively increased risk, massively increased migration, massively increased hunger, and all the attendant horrors of health and starvation and disease, with a declining amount of ODA. So the question is, where is the money going to come from to fill the gap? And half my life is in the finance sector, and half my life is outside of the finance sector. And I can promise you that if you go to the private sector and say, there's a really good opportunity to invest in a high-risk environment with very low returns, you're not going to be overwhelmed by excited punters who want to put their dollar on the table. So we have to find a way, to Uchang's point, of reducing risk. Now, risk reduction in that context is both a matter of real risk reduction, but also the perception of risk and reducing like that. One of the compounding problems we have in the world at the moment is the debt crisis. We have at the moment 33 countries in Africa paying more on their debt servicing than they are on health and education combined. Countries such as Zambia, for instance, are paying way above, actually, in terms of their interest rates, what they should be paying, because their risk is actually much reduced. So the question is, how do you reduce perceived risk? How do you actually reduce risk? And there are two ways of doing it, I think. And this is to answer, you'll be delighted to know at last your question. First is actually to have an understanding of the real data. And there's some great opportunities, there are great examples of early warning systems. And the International Crisis Group has just come up with one on E-Earth. WRI has got one on nature. We at MPS are putting together one which is, it's not really so much an early warning system, it's drilling its way through all the data on the drivers of insecurity, but also bringing in macroeconomics, finance, intelligence, and security to try and get a sense of what is the opportunity to prioritize the projects which actually can have an impact on the drivers of conflict, but then also optimize the finance. And it's the prioritization and the optimization key, because if you again go to the private sector and say, hi guys, we got a high risk environment, low return, and it's in a nature-based solution, the average institutional investor say, what is a nature-based solution? Is it agriculture, is it forestry, is it infrastructure, is it water? What is the box I have to tick? So we have to come up with a framework approach which allows the private sector, who might be interested to invest, to have a set of risk parameters which they can identify and tick. So we are hoping, MPS, and then working with a lot of partners, to provide such a framework with an interface into both public and the private sector finance, in order to not have replicate some fantastic work that's been going on here, and what Kira's doing is brilliant, and what Berkhoff doing, and also what ICG is fantastic too, but to really focus on solutions, because otherwise we spend too much of our time talking about, you know, the concept of doing something that, if we had any money to do it, should there been the opportunity to think about what we might have done had we done this in the first place, as opposed to really focusing on what we can do now, because we don't have a huge amount of time.
Thank you so much. And how much, just to continue with you, coming to the topic of innovation in finance, how do you, what are the exact concrete instruments that actually are coming up, are on the horizon, that we can use for precisely convincing the private sector to invest in the conflict, you know, fragile context? Is there anything, is there some movement there, or is it just on the discourse level?
No, there is, but I mean, again, this will sound a slightly heretical answer to your question. So having spent too many decades myself designing innovative financial instruments, we've got all the instruments we need. We don't need any more innovative financial instruments. And we've got hundreds of the wretched things lying around, mostly unused. There are a few tweaks here and there we can bring about, but we don't need to every year think, none of this is working, we've got to design different. We actually apply the finance that we have now through the instruments we have now. And if we actually if we actually use the money that, or we're able to receive the money that has been committed and pledged, then it would be transformative. So let's not be distracted by innovation. Let's use what we've got. Second point, if I may, is that through another thing I chair called the Sustainable Sovereign Debt Hub, which I set up between the IMF and World Bank originally, we took out now it's Nature Finance. That's leading work on trying to see how KPIs, key performance indicators around resilience, food security, water security, health, etc., can be identified, and then to the extent to which those KPIs themselves send a signal that risk is being managed and governance is good and transparency is good. If you're able to do that, and working with a lot of credit rating agencies, then you are able to reduce the risk, thereby reducing the cost of capital, thereby increasing access to capital, thereby increasing employment, which is absolutely so key, thereby increasing fiscal headroom, thereby then enabling more investment. That is a virtuous circle which you can link into an awful lot of things, such as the TNFD, the TGFC, and a whole range of others. You can actually get a sense of the financial instruments, whether it's blended finance, whether it's bond issuances, whether it's microinsurance, macroinsurance, the whole caboodle. At the moment, there is no standardized way of looking either at resilience and risk. And if we can standardize that, then actually we could move what finance is available into these issues. My last point is that we spend all our time talking about FDI, foreign direct investment, understandably perhaps, but the domestic capital has been mobilized too. Domestic capital is to some extent already by definition risk adjusted, but they don't want actually to get low returns and high risk too. So it's a way of putting some of these mechanisms to play within the domestic capital markets to mobilize that source of capital, which can then link into FDI. You're still awake. Well done. That's fantastic.
Thank you. So no, it's fantastic. And I have so many questions and I hope you do too. We are arriving at our last set of questions. So I'm inviting you already to think about yours, those on joining us online as well. Because, with everything we've heard so far, and, of course, Nazanin and Akira gave us some concrete examples. We would like to talk about how can we translate this evidence from communities, from research into policies and financing strategies. So for you, Nazanin, how can peace-building organizations like Berko Foundation ensure that the lived experiences of farmers, women, and displaced people shape the land-related climate, peace, security policy investment?
Well, we can't do it on our own. I mean,
Sure.
Berkov, yeah, it's a great organization, but we need a lot more help on that, I would say. I think the key is to recognize that peace building and climate adaptation and land restoration, everything we're talking about here, has to start from the ground up. From the lived experiences of many of the people that are facing those stresses every day. And look, as a peace building organization, we can't go out into the field and build the canals ourselves. Mm-hmm. But what we can do is build the cooperation to make it work. Because it's all good and well, investing money, and actually you don't need that much money in a lot of these projects. That's the great thing about it. But then if you don't take into account some of the contexts that you're working in, and things can go badly wrong, then all of that investment, will basically not last, and also probably won't have a legitimacy to last. So just a few examples. In Iraq, in Basra, we worked with host and displaced families and communities who are dealing with water shortages. And what we did was we basically helped create the ground for a local social pact, which was signed by local authorities, leaders, residents. It was the first of its kind, and it still is in existence now. And it guides both the water sharing and the local planning around, water and land, etc. Similarly, in Somalia, our dialogues have informed the creation of a sort of climate security action plan. And one thing I would say that we learnt from our work in Iraq, Yemen, and Somalia, interestingly, is that the actual agreements have more legitimacy and more resilience when you have youth, women, and displaced people involved. And just an example from Yemen, where we found that actually the pacts and the agreements that were signed were fragile precisely because they didn't involve everybody. And so a lot of the key grievances were basically sort of left unresolved. So you need to bridge the sort of informal and the formal authority. It's not easy. And we basically need to make sure that, national adaptation plans, NDCs, all of these kind of consider these issues. To sum it up, I would say that you've got to deliver the solutions to people. And then you've got to include them as well. Otherwise, any investment can just basically blow up in your face.
Thank you so much. And also, the people have solutions very often, indigenous peoples and, the local communities who actually know what to do. It's just that these solutions are not being invested in because they are not, if I may say, use the word sexy enough for investors. So with this, I'm going to move to our last question to Kira about your work in your context. How can this evidence that you've gathered from your research, narratives on the links between land restoration, climate, peace, be made more effective in shaping policy debates? And what does it take to ensure that governments and international organizations not only hear the analysis, because we've been hearing about it for years now, but act on it?
I think this is a great question, and I think it's a question that's been on a lot of people's minds recently, but I think just to reflect a bit on what researchers can do to make their research findings more accessible and more usable in this climate, peace, and security policy making, I think there are maybe 5 principles that I wanted to highlight. The first is maybe a point on reliability of information. So policymakers can only act on evidence that they trust, and I think there's a lot of political sensitivities and disinformation on the rise in this field that makes credibility a really important form of currency at the moment. And Anna, you mentioned this, data and evidence are becoming a lot more important because of that. But as a researcher, I also want to defend, independent peer-reviewed research. Even though I think Jason made a great point about the enormous need to act quickly on these topics, I think we still need to continue to invest in research because we need to understand which responses work and which responses are actually going to do more harm than good. Maybe just to point out here that researchers are really struggling to compete with TikTok, so please be nice to them if you come across one in the corridor. The second point is about relevance, because evidence really needs to respond to real-world policy questions. And a good way for researchers to do that is to involve policymakers early on in their research projects, not just as an audience that receives a final PDF, but really as reviewers and as sounding boards, which I think, from my experience, can improve the accuracy of your research. But just as importantly, I think it creates a sense of co-creation and of ownership of the findings and the recommendations that come out of it, and people are much more likely to use what they've helped to shape. And then the third point is about timing, because I think, unfortunately, for many researchers, we've experienced that our most excellent research has fallen flat if it missed the policy moment. And I think there's something we can do to align our outputs more with decision cycles, whether that's at COP or a mandate renewal in the UN Security Council or a budget process. The fourth point is about the actionability of our recommendations. So we need to be concrete and feasible when we speak to policymakers rather than aspirational. Policymakers need realistic next steps. And so identifying what's actually possible within a specific institution often sort of requires that co-creation that I was speaking about in my second point. And then the last one is dialogue, because I think that our research shouldn't necessarily just end with a publication. We can use our research as a starting point to convene different people, different sectors, even in small informal settings for policymakers and practitioners and other research to interrogate research findings together and to decide what the implications are. So in that sense, I think evidence isn't just a question of knowledge, it's also a question of diplomacy in this political moment. So maybe I see the future of impactful research in this space isn't just one where evidence is sort of produced. It's one where evidence is used to connect people and to bridge competing perspectives and to help make policy action more feasible. But I'll stop here, and I'd be really interested to explore that further in discussion as well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. We are now at the moment where we open the floor to our colleagues here in the room, but also online. So I am going to go to the room first, and I can see Annika raising her hand. I don't see any other hands up. If I could ask you to introduce yourselves and tell us to whom you're addressing your question. Annika, please.
Great, thank you so much. My name is Annika Hilding Norberg. I'm head of peace operations, peacebuilding here at the GCSB. So first, thank you very much for a very illuminating and I would say fascinating sets of presentations. And picking up on the last call to action here, I have two questions, if I may, and I'd like each of you to respond to it, which is in a bit less than a year, the incoming new UN Secretary General, she will have to develop a new strategy, and she will have invited the four of you to her office, and one thing from each of your perspectives, one best practice, a very concrete example of a situation in geography or function or finance or whatever, the one thing that you would advise her or him, we have to be open-minded, on what should be pursued. So we have to build on, we identify the challenges, and I really appreciated all the conversations. The second question is, who would you think would be the best Secretary General to address your issues? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annika. Any other questions before we move? Yes, please.
Bonjour, hello. My name is Hicham Lemissi. I'm geopolitical analyst, also teacher in international relations and columnist. I have maybe two questions. First, I'm very interested on the question of hydro diplomacy, and I'm also very critic with the concept of peace building. I prefer to not have peace destroying. It's much more interesting. But my question is on the question of Nile. Now, what is your analysis with the situation of the new Ethiopian barrage? What consequences, and how do you think or imagine the situation in the future between the countries Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia? Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, we will stop for now, and I saw one question that's going to come up in the next round. Uchang, let's start with you. For a change.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Well, regarding who would be the best person for the next SG, I would say probably I don't know. Maybe I can dream of it, but well, one thing I want to push forward for the new strategy for the incoming SG, definitely I would propose a topic that is much related to this, environmental diplomacy and peace building efforts, because we know that in the UN system, there are specific organizations, institutions are dedicated for its functions. But I mean, as we said, we need some synergy and coordination cooperation across the different functions of different offices. Then definitely we need some sort of pay attention to this nexus between environment diplomacy as well, the peace dialogue, etc. So
Thank
That's
you.
my bet.
Thank you so
Thank you.
Nazani, we'll go this way and then we'll come to Keira at the end.
That is such a great question. If I had the opportunity to sit in front of Mia Motley, I hope she's the next Secretary General, I would say, look, you need to actually start persuading world leaders to invest in mediation and not missiles. That's what I would say. See, I take your point on peace building. I mean, I worked for International Crisis Group, a conflict prevention organization. It's far cheaper to prevent conflict than to wait for the conflict to happen and then to spend all the money on reconstructing various parts of the world that are going to need reconstruction. I totally agree with you there. On the GERD dam, I guess that's what you're talking about. Just in my previous role at International Crisis Group, obviously we worked a lot on that GERD situation. Look, it's a fait accompli. It's been built. It's started. There's nothing much you can do about it. But what's really important now is to focus on data sharing, to make sure that countries like Sudan in particular that are affected by flooding and affected by extreme weather events, and they're in the depths of a horrific, horrible conflict themselves, have the information that they need from various partners in Egypt. And there was a lot of worry. Obviously, it's an existential threat for Egypt to have this dam. It's a huge issue for all three countries. But I think that there is a way forward if the countries are willing to share this information. And that's where the data comes into it, I think. There are platforms there which are really important. But just from my first indications, from looking at the dam and the impact, I think the Ethiopians are very wise to have filled it during the rainy season. But we just have to see, because I think that there are going to be water shortages at some points during the next few years. There are going to be droughts. There are going to be issues going ahead. Maybe not because of the dam, but because of all the other issues that we're dealing with in terms of climate change and this cross-border water transboundary issues. But yeah, thanks.
Justin.
Questions? Yes, let's hope it's a woman. Fantastic. I agree. Mia Motley is cool. You evidently need somebody who's going to speak truth to power, as opposed to sort of trying to massage it on the sidelines. So I think that's probably quite a key criteria. If I may just go actually back to something Keira said, I mean, we should embrace every researcher and also and this is an increasingly rare species, any independent journalist who's actually able to write truth. And I think if you're speaking truth to power, it's quite helpful to have an understanding of what truth is. And truth is becoming a very elusive commodity at the moment, which is why we badly need the research, independent research, and the data actually to say what's going on rather than it being massaged. I think in terms of, and if I may, just your point, in terms of women and children, part of all the other stuff we're doing collectively in this room, everything we do has to be to encourage every girl to be educated and also to ensure that every woman and girl has access, not just to the education system, but also the job market as well. And unless we do that, we're not in a great place. So projects and programs which, as you say, build from the bottom up and are inclusive are key. But also they have to be, there are lots of simple, nice projects which are fine, but to have the impact, there needs to be a correlation between the larger projects for debt nature swaps, perhaps for debt restructuring, the larger sort of landscape programs which are going into things which look at a whole lot of other levers, so health, insurance, education, food security, the relationship between school meals and regenerative agriculture and health, for instance. And there are various projects which are going on in Uganda and elsewhere which are looking at these. These are projects which demonstrate that if you actually put together a systemic understanding of the linkages, you can have a significantly larger impact. And I don't think we now really have the luxury too often of trying to address systemic challenges with projects which are not themselves systemic. We have to have that sort of broader view. In terms of the dams, it's about, I don't know, 5 millennia since I looked at that particular problem. But one of the, which was in the 1980s, when it was already an issue about how the water security in the region was going to be looked at, and debt issues around that. What I was always struck by was that people still look at the dam, as opposed to looking at it within a broader landscape. And the landscape of regenerative agriculture, energy, and infrastructure, and the microeconomics around that are absolutely key, because otherwise you merely put in place something which is going to, again, because it's focused on one sector, have an outweighted impact on the others. So that placing it within a systemic context, I think, is key. And as Jean knows much more about it than me.
Thank you, Dustin. Keira.
Okay, thank you for these questions. I think I will not add any more to the point about the new Secretary General. I do hope it's a woman. I do hope she's a strong mediator, but I really don't envy her job. I want to come back to the first question, which was about developing new strategies and sharing concrete examples that could be pursued. And here I want to describe a little bit some of the approach that IOM has used in Somalia. I've been sort of involved in as a research partner in that project for about 3 years now. And I think it's such an amazing example of how a resilience design approach can be used in a very, very difficult context to, do sort of community stabilization, what I would call environmental peace building. It really is, it's an approach that centers on essentially water capture and retention. It's really, really cost effective. It uses nature-based solutions and like earthworks to shape the soil in ways that better captures rainwater, and that basically nourishes both the groundwater and also the vegetation in those areas. It's been really intentionally built on indigenous knowledge in those communities. It's designed to bring different communities in conflict together around those projects. It also engages with diaspora funding through crowdfunding mechanisms that actually solicit financial input from friends and family, both in Somalia but also abroad. I think that's a really cool example. And also it reinforces local district governments and engages with a really thriving local business sector as well to implement clean energy projects. So I think that's been an amazing example of how this can work in practice, even in a very difficult context. And I want to make a specific mention here. That project has designed into its work the role of Somali women as peace ambassadors, as conflict mediators between different clans, and also as repositories of knowledge about indigenous and drought-resistant seed varieties. So I think that's been a really great way of valuing the role of women in their communities and in advancing knowledge. So I'll hand back, but thank you for those great questions.
So far, and one from two. Okay, fantastic. We'll take you. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much for the very interesting presentations. My name is Alex Flavel. I'm currently here as an independent observer, but I've worked in the past quite a lot for IOM on the climate change, environment, migration nexus. So I was very interested in what Ms. Tariff was just saying about the community stabilization type work. I think that's perhaps one good way of gluing together the different elements. I wanted to come back to also something that Mr. Mundi was saying about the lack of common indicators to convince institutional donors on why they should fund these potentially higher risk projects and programs. It seems like a no-brainer, because it seems like these projects make sense on all levels. Environmental sustainability, social cohesion. It's bringing together all of the different conventions, the Rio conventions. So I'm wondering why that issue of accepted indicators is there. Why is it who needs to be doing that work to establish? Should that be the secretariats of UNCCD and the UNEP and the UNFCCC? Should those kind of common indicators be coming from there? Would that be a pathway of going forward? And then just going back then, perhaps just onto the migration type level again, I think there's a massive potential when we're talking about the migration or human mobility is perhaps the phrasing that's used nowadays because it encapsulates the broader issues. But we need to look not just at displacement as an outcome, but also how human mobility can be brought into the equation as a helpful factor. The kind of things that Ms. Tarif was mentioning about mobilizing diaspora funding, for example, but it can also be, I mean, I know that IOM, and I did some work with IOM on this, about promoting sustainable reintegration. So returnees, and this was in the West Africa context, looking at how projects were being funded there to support the reintegration of returned migrants from Europe, but how the funding could be used through land restoration type projects, for example. So that's something that I think funders will definitely be in northern donors anyway, will definitely be interested in, and I think that's potentially one avenue to explore further. Anyway, so I'm bringing up lots of different points. I'm sorry, but that's my my initial thoughts. Yeah, very interesting topic and presentations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A second question from the room.
It's going to be also a bit messy. I'm Gillian Brown. I have a background in protection, in armed conflict, and dialogue with weapon bearers. And my question is on your experience, Madam Moshiri, in terms of how you also engage or not engage with non-state actors when they are governing areas. Sometimes they are let's say, the institution governing some large part of countries. And I was wondering, in your experience, how do you bring them to the table? What are the incentives for them, especially if they are also exploiting the natural resources? What has worked? What were the challenges you encountered? And obviously, it's also case by case basis because all armed groups are also operating differently, have different motives and ideology. But in your experience, what were some of the main key takeaways, especially when you mentioned the agreements between the local communities, etc. And yeah, if you have concrete.
Thank you so much. And I have one more comment question from online audience, and then we will go in the reverse order. So we will start with Kira, then Dustin, Nazanin, and Uting. Question, comment from online participant who didn't introduce themselves. When we talk about environmental peace building, most examples come from in-country interventions. This makes sense both in theory and in practice, since approaches often foster power sharing, equitable access to resources, and inclusive decision-making. But when we move to transboundary context, where ecosystems and resources cross national borders, like the example of Nile and the dam, the dynamics become much more complex. So can the same mechanisms that work at the national level also be applied effectively across borders? Or do transboundary settings require entirely different approaches to peace building? So with this, Kira, this is your moment.
Thank you. I think, do they require a completely different set of approaches? I don't think a completely new set of environmental peace building approaches, but I do think there are specific challenges to working on that topic in transboundary areas, including sort of differences in governance systems and how do you connect those across transboundary areas, different sort of forms of engagement with national governments in different countries and in transboundary areas. I think that it's maybe more at the governance level, because at the level of the land and the ecosystems, I think those things are not necessarily bound by territorial borders. I think there is really interesting work going on this topic in areas of West Africa and in the Liptako Gourma regional authority, and also in the Lake Chad region Basin Commission. So those are sort of transboundary governance mechanisms that are actively working on this topic and looking for ways to advance this. And then, of course, IGAD in the Horn of Africa has many years of experience of working on transboundary issues in policy and in practice. So that's also another area where I think there's a lot of good examples. But I also just wanted to point out that if you expand this issue of transboundary, I wanted to come back to the diaspora question again, because I think beyond the sort of issue of transboundary contexts, there's also opportunities of engaging with people across borders internationally in areas of environmental peace building. There's not just the financial aspect that diaspora can contribute, but there's also technical skills and knowledge and opportunities that can be, I think, enhanced through better engaging with diaspora groups in peace building processes, and definitely in environmental peace building processes.
Or involvement with the non-state groups, non-state armed groups? Ira?
Sorry, was that question to me? The sound is cutting a little bit.
Sorry, Justin, please.
Great question. I get it above my pay grade. I think others here will be better and able to answer that than me. So on your two questions, and then also the one online. If I may answer the one online as a way of answering your question as well. But also doing it from a financial lens rather than anything else, but if I may. So there are, and have been over the years, a number of attempts to put together transboundary financial instruments, and particularly really guarantee structures to take away risk, as you're saying. And for my sins, I was the person who came up with the idea of the blue bond in the first blue bond in the Seychelles. And afterward, a lot of ministers of finance asked, could we have an Indian Ocean one, or a Pacific one, or Caribbean one? The problem with that is that it's possible to do, but only in quite a limited way, because if you're trying to structure a financial instrument which is covering quite a significant range of diversity in the risk profiles, either in terms of governance or sector, it's very hard for those who would be interested in investing in that financial instrument to actually work out what the real risk return is. So from a financial point of view, the question is, how do you have sufficient standardization around the definition of risk in order to be able to value the return, which then can bring people in? And it's the absence of that standardization which makes these transboundary projects actually quite difficult to look at from a guarantee perspective, or indeed from a purely investment point of view. If you're trying to use a guarantee as a bond, which effectively is saying there's very low risk, the return isn't so great, but the risk has been reduced, you have to find a way of answering the question of, this is a risk, how are you managing it? So there are attempts, and things have got closer with both the TNFD and the TCFD to try and get some level of coherence across those risks. But those risk indicators are yet to be in any way totally inculcated, have the credit risk agencies look at things. And that gap is a problem in terms of relationship between private sector finance and public sector finance, hence the need for cohesion. Your second point, if I may, in terms of the diaspora and the return, I think what Kira's just said about the positive benefits of energy and technological skills, inclusivity, let alone the issue of remittances, are all very pertinent, and should be embraced and celebrated. The problem we've got is that the political dialectic at the moment is, let's build a wall, and walls aren't great because they tend not to last for a very long time, but also they're not as inclusive as they might be, so at least a bit. So finding a way of actually having a two-way dialogue, so both the host country and the countries from which people have come, is absolutely vital. And that level of a two-way dialogue has to mean that when you're looking at countries who have exported, if you wish, a lot of people have left from them because of climate risk, because of food security and water insecurity, unless you can address those problems at a time when climate risk is growing, food security risk is growing, what do these people go back to? To a situation which is worse and more violent, and they're more vulnerable. So that I think the sine qua non, so the prerequisite of getting people to return is not to send them back into a hellhole where conditions are even worse, but to create the conditions and the incentives whereby they can live in a restored environment. So I think land restoration, landscape management, water management as instruments for peace and stability and economic growth are absolutely vital, which is why what Yu Chang and his fantastic team do is so important. Sorry, banging on. But...
Oh, it's perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your question. I think I would say the same applies to both non-state armed actors and de facto authorities. I think that the impacts of extreme weather events, which are in many cases linked to climate change, are a great leveler. They affect everyone in the same way, even groups that perhaps are sitting here in Geneva aren't able to talk to at the moment, although there may be some discrete dialogue happening on the ground between various parties. The flip side of that is that non-state armed actors can also use these resources as a weapon to punish communities and also to win communities over, win hearts and minds when they need to. I would say, in some of the cases that I've looked at, when hundreds of thousands of people are displaced because of climate impacts like drought, that's your main source of income gone. So it's in your interest to keep people in place where you can tax them, use them, recruit, young boys, marry the women, or whatever it is you want to do if you're one of these nefarious actors. In the case of what we've seen in West Africa and the Sahel, you see a huge uptick in illicit economies, which are linked to, deforestation, illegal logging, etc. But you also see the incursion of armed groups into areas which are natural habitats and natural ecosystems, which is a huge issue with all these great parks from Chad to Gabon, which are being infiltrated by these armed actors as well. And they're using it for cover, they're using it for resources, of course, let's not go down the route of illicit mining as well, which is all connected to. But just one example I wanted to give, just in the case of Yemen, I would say, obviously things are very difficult in terms of the whole peace process there is completely stalled. And, you have a group authority like the Houthis who are portrayed by many in the media as just being not interested in environment at all, obviously causing massive pollution by downing tankers. But at the same time, I would say, and this is something I said to somebody recently, there are massive water shortages in Sana'a. People don't have drinking water. So if you're a ruling de facto authority, it's in your interests to consider these environmental and climatic risks. And what does that mean? Beyond the opening up right now of prisoner swaps, could there be an opening there, an environmental opening, an opening linked to water? I would say yes. Others would say no, that's just not relevant, it's not important. But, in my mind and my thinking, I still think that, armed groups and also these de facto authorities have to rule over people. They have to deal with the communities and they have to provide those basic services if they want to have a legitimacy. You can't just rule by the gun. So I would say that is the way to approach these matters. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Chang.
Do I have time? Right.
Go.
Thank you so much. Yeah, coming to the question about this difference between in-country approach and the transboundary approach. Actually, I'm working in the context of multi-country and transboundary context a lot. So probably approach shouldn't be very much different, but there are some distinct elements that the transboundary context has. These include sort of transboundary context far way more complex and complicated. Not just to mention about this geopolitics and geoeconomics. I mean, sometimes influence coming from the outside of the region, which is beyond our control. So it's far more difficult. A lot of challenges just, you know, to overcome these hurdles to get to the point there where we want to reach in a certain time frame. But another thing is that the multi-country or transboundary context require much more time to reach the certain level of this agreement. For some regions, actually, there are no such regional strategies and regional documents available because they cannot agree on the same language. So that's one thing. On the question about this non-state actor involvement, so under the convention, UNCC convention structure, so we value the role of the land management actors on the ground because think about who actually working on land is farmers, herders, regardless male, female, they're all community level people. That's why we value the integration of involvement of the CSO in our decision-making process. They also need to be integrated, included in the planning stage as much as possible. So then they can own, they can feel they own this project program when it is started, and then they can have ownership of this project. And actually, that's the elements that would guarantee the success of the delivery of the project on the ground. I don't think I have anything to add on this migration mobility, but on the common indicators, of course, there are a lot of discussions going on these common indicators, but I mean, the indicators under different conventions already set by countries. So without any sort of new idea coming from the countries, we cannot, I don't know, but besides these common indicators among 3 European conventions, there are discussions going on common reporting platform. So I'm not so sure which kind of format they want to see in terms of reporting, but there are certainly discussions, and this is something more feasible in practice if countries could have a common platform for a reporting purpose to report back to the respective conventions.
Thank you, Chang.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to come back to Kira if she had anything to add, because we cut you off a little bit. I did, actually.
Not at all. But I think I did want to come back to the point that Alex made about human mobility, and he made some great points about sort of reintegration of returned migrants and the implications for land use as well. But I also wanted to just make a point, which maybe we haven't really talked about, but there's also this challenge around how climate action can also involve a great number of risks in changing land use patterns as well, that also are related to this peace and security question that we're discussing. So, you know, from different issues about sea level rise and the existential risks to small island nations, but also displacement from land or sort of forced, or not forced, but sort of displacement from lands that aren't safe for humans or where humans can't live anymore, which has to be managed by governments in most cases, to more violent forms of displacement by mining for critical minerals and, you know, the pollution that can result from that, and also the encroachment of, for example, wind farms on indigenous land, which is actually a problem in the north of Sweden here where I am based. And we know that even nature conservation projects can also exclude people and local communities from lands that they've had access to and resources that they've traditionally relied on. So I think this is also, this is maybe the flip side of that conversation. Another reason why I continue to emphasize the importance of research, because these approaches are so crucial. We need to sort of act on them, but at the same time, we need to be able to do them in a way that we are sure will not do more harm to people and to create more of those risks to peace and security. Thanks.
Kira, I don't see any other questions. This is the last moment for the panel to add anything you would like. Yes, please.
Just actually an answer to your question of projects, cool projects. There's one in India which is called the June project, which is a conservation restoration project, which is great in its own terms. It's not dissimilar to what happened in the last plateau in China in that way. But to other points being made, and Kira's point, it's also including indigenous knowledge in terms of the built environment. And it's trying to find a way of including both the need to provide homes and habitat for people and homes and habitat for wildlife whilst doing landscape restoration. And there's a really cool video actually online about it, and it's so inspiring. There's one particular individual in India who's determined to do what he can and change his own land into this, and the Plateau Foundation, which I share a bit of it, is involved, and it's really, really inspiring because it hits all the targets of land restoration, conservation, indigenous people, built environment, education, the whole thing. It's that sort of project which I think we should celebrate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other comments? With this, we are going to close this conversation. I just wanted to thank you so much for your insights. I think that we kind of diagnosed the problem. We found some remedies, and I think that, you know, what's really interesting in these conversations that we actually already have the solutions. It's just a question that, as was in my last question, we have the analysis, we have the solutions, and now how do we implement them and how do we put them into practice is another story. And there's something that Keira mentioned in her last answer to the question about how acting in one area of environmental insecurity may have unintended negative consequences in another, is really inviting all of us to have this more ecological approach to peace and security, to working in our different areas, to having synergies between the Rio conventions, to mobilizing also local communities, but also national levels, regional levels, global levels, because what I see in my work and, you know, from my conversations with people who work on these issues is how many gaps we have, you know, between these, you know, local levels where actually solutions are already there, available and very cheap very often, and how they are not being scaled up to, you know, to be applied elsewhere or on a more global level. This is kind of a missed opportunity or a low-hanging fruit. We can, you know, it's we who decide how we see these things. So with this, I really wanted to thank again our panelists for your excellent insights. I've learned so much. I wanted to thank the public who came here in person, but also public that is seeing us, watching us online. I wanted to thank the public who's going to watch this video as well, and really a call for action for all of us to share this, the recording of this conference, not only with your friends, but also with your supervisors, bosses, you know, decision makers who actually can now understand how land restoration is important for our conversations. Last but not the least, I just wanted to single out one person that I really wanted to thank. And she's watching us online, Miss Ani Tovmasian, who works for the Peace Forest Initiative and at the UNCCD, who was really instrumental in putting together the concept of this event, but also connected with all of us before. So Ani, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. And with this, we finish this peace panel, and I would like to ask you to join me in thanking our panelists.